Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on The Story Within, we retell those moments, honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. My name is Elaine Brooks, widow, former bookkeeper, trustee of a family trust that everyone treats like the utility grid, always on, invisible until it isn't. The first cool rain of December swept Houston that evening, the kind that beads on live oak leaves and turns river oaks into a mirror. The neighborhood association had strung warm bulbs from block to block. Golf carts idled along the curb. A brass quartet worked through silver bells under a white tent. I wore my yellow raincoat and carried a tin of orange bergamot cookies because I still bring something when I'm invited, especially when I'm not. Brooke Whitmore. My daughter-in-law found me before my son did. She moved like a well-timed entrance navy dress that photographed well hair pulled into a clean knot meant to say effort without sweat. She kissed the air once to my left and set a hand on my forearm the way women do when a camera might be near. "Elaine," she said, voice honeyed for bystanders. "We're keeping it close this year. Immediate family only." Across the street, a photographer crouched to capture a toddler with a glow wand. In the reflection on the shop window, I could see us Brooks practice light and my raincoat that didn't match anything. Her fingers pressed once polite pressure like a stamp on outgoing mail. "I hear you," I said. I didn't ask who counted as immediate family, or why a mother becomes extended when the bills are due, and immediate when the gossip is good. I didn't ask whose idea it was. Brooke never uses a broom without borrowing a hand to hold it. My son Daniel approached with the careful smile of a man editing a sentence as he says it. "Mom," he started, but his eyes slid past me to the quartet, to the Whitmore's neighbors, to the committee chair tapping a glass with a spoon. I let him keep the sentence. I handed Brooke the tin. "Citrus," I said, "for your table." She thanked me as if she'd been handed a catalog. Her nails matched her dress. "Drive safe," Daniel murmured, touching my upper arm, the way you touch a coworker you don't want to hug. He looked relieved when I didn't make him choose a side in public. The band lifted, the bulbs hummed, and I stepped back into the rain. It softened everything but the truth. Spring Branch is 12 minutes and an income bracket away from River Oaks when the lights are green. My bungalow wears its age out loud, brick settling porch light a little too warm. Inside, the air held a note of cedar from the tiny sachet I keep in the hall closet. I hung the raincoat, twisted the knob on the kettle, and set my chipped white mug on the counter. The chip never bothered me. It's the sort of imperfection that keeps a thing from being stolen at a party. I didn't turn on the news. I didn't call anyone. People in this town are generous with advice they don't have to live by. On the kitchen table lay the binder, brown leather corners softened, a yellow tab marking Section 8C. Caleb, my husband, was the one who wanted it written down plain. He built custom cabinets for 35 years and believed there ought to be a hinge on everything that matters, a way to open, a way to close. I made tea and stood by the back door while the kettle clicked to its own ending. The yard was slick. Rosemary leaned into the rain. I tried to remember the last holiday that didn't ask me to apologize for existing. Couldn't. 5 years earlier, Daniel and Brooke came up short at closing. I cracked my 401k like an egg, $24,000 wired at 3:12 p.m. on a Wednesday. No one meant to forget the time or the day, but the people who sleep well after someone else carries their interest payments tend to misplace details. After that came the credit card. They never returned the dented roof post-storm, the daycare checks when Brooks Consulting went seasonal. I have a ledger brain. I do not forget what I reconcile. I took the mug to the table and opened the binder. The paper smelled faintly of toner and honest work. Section 8C stared back a paragraph I'd highlighted last spring when my sleep started fraying. In cases of misuse, coercion, or actions materially adverse to the settler's intent, the trustee may suspend distributions at her sole discretion. Caleb made sure that sentence lived here before he died. He didn't raise his voice much. He preferred that his safeguards do the talking. My phone buzzed. A River Oaks number I recognize when donations are discussed, but not when decisions are made. I let it find its own voicemail. The rain slowed. Traffic hummed on the loop like a farm machine. There is a particular quiet that follows a public slight. It doesn't rush. It sits. In that quiet I counted not dollars, not grievances, just the rooms where I used to belong. The guest room I painted while Brooke curated a nursery aesthetic. The patio I paid to resurface when the contractor skipped town. The chiropractor visits after Daniel's back seized during the move I financed. The cookies I baked tonight because I wanted to believe civility could pass for affection if you wrapped it in wax paper. I could still smell the bergamot on my hands. In the den above the bookcase hangs a photograph of Caleb at Lake Travis Wind in his carpenter's hair. One hand on the rail, the other holding nothing at all. He'd teased me once. Don't use money to buy your place at a table. Build your own table, then invite the people who wipe it down with you. I heard that differently now. I set the mug on a coaster, a cabinet door sample he brought home when we were young, and opened the drawer with the envelopes. A habit of mine, each one marked with a month and a bill tidy as spices in a rack. I pulled December slit out the stamped envelope meant for a charitable gala ticket I'd reconsidered. A little water ran off the porch and trickled into the bed of rosemary, the thin silver streams that make their own decisions. My house smelled like clean wood and damp wool. The binder waited. People like Brooks say close to family, as if closeness is a matter of seating, as if distance is measured by chair legs. Closeness, in my experience, is who does the dishes after the guests leave. I put my palm flat on Section 8C and read it again. The words did not get warmer. They didn't need to. I reached for a sticky flag and set it there bright against the text. A mark is not a move. It is a decision to see something the same way tomorrow. I washed the mug, set it upside down on a towel, and turned off the porch light. Then I returned to the table and closed the binder with both hands, the way you close a lid on something that will not behave if you look away. If there wasn't a chair for me, there wouldn't be a check with my name behind it. That was all. The rain finished what it was doing outside. Inside, I let the house hold still. Rain lingered overnight and left the streets rinsed the sky one flat sheet of pearl. I woke to quiet. No news, no music, just the kettle's first click and the faint cedar that lives in my hall closet. The binder sat where I'd left it, a polite weight on the table. I ran a finger along the spine and pulled out the stack of envelopes I keep in the drawer bank. Letters, gift notes, a printout of transfer confirmations I'd filed by habit rather than plan. By 8, the light had gone clear. I carried the pile to the den, set up my old flatbed scanner, and started feeding the past across the glass. The machine breathed its small breath whir, blink, save, and each page appeared on the screen with a name I could trust. Date, vendor, amount. $24,000 wired from my rollover account. A cashier's check marked roofing hail claim shortfall. The daycare ledger with my checks filling the months Brooke called transitional. Venmo screenshots. Zelle receipts. A photo of the contractor's invoice the day the patio came up uneven and Daniel's back went out halfway through moving the grill I'd bought. I labeled everything like a bookkeeper would if the reader were a stranger with no reason to be fair. At 10, my phone lit. Brooks' name, too many exclamation marks in the preview. Hey Elaine, tiny favor, can you swing by Hobby at 1:40 and collect Mom and Dad? Their driver canceled last minute. Just wear something nice. The club is strict about appearances today. Thanks. I could see her breath on the mirror of the world, the part of kindness that sounds like a checklist. I typed back what I had to give. Use a car service. Bayou City Town Car handles last-minute runs. I've used Marcus. He's punctual. I'm not available. 3 dots, then a pause, then... That's not the same. They're traditional. I didn't reply. I bookmarked the thread for later. Outside, the drip from the eaves went steady. I returned to the scanner. Grocery receipts from weeks they forgot their wallet. The nursery paint swatches in the palette Brooke called Sage Cloud, while she watched me tape trim. A letter I'd signed for the lender non-repayable gift. I scanned that one twice, once in color, once in grayscale, the way I used to double-enter sensitive numbers in the books. At noon, I drove to the copy place, wedged between a nail salon and a taqueria. The manager in a red polo nodded me toward the heavy machine in the corner and handed me a box of binder clips. I printed single-sided 12-sets tabs in the same order as my binder transfers letters: childcare, home repairs, communications. I added a cover sheet with 3 lines: Brooks Family Trust, Disbursements and Gifts, 2019-2024. Prepared by trustee for clarity. On the way home, I stopped for a club sandwich and ate it in the car under a live oak. City maintenance had left a pile of magnolia leaves on the curb. A kid in a school polo walked past earbuds and mouthing lyrics. Houston at lunch, every story moving in its own lane. When I pulled into my driveway, Rosa, from 2 doors down, was unloading a case of canned tomatoes. She lifted a hand. Elaine, you have a minute, food pantry delivery got bumped. I have space, but not 2 hands. I took 3. We stacked the cans in her trunk beside bags of rice and a box of baby formula. You're quiet this week, she said. Not fishing, just noticing. Her dark hair was pinned with 2 bobby pins that didn't match. Working, I said. She nodded at the papers under my arm. Looks like it. We set the final case on her bumper. She wiped her palms on her jeans. Come by Saturday if you want. We always need a numbers person to check totals before we open the doors. I'll see, I said. It came out plain. Rosa smiled like that counted. Back inside, I found the blog before it found me. A neighbor had emailed a link with a subject line that read simply, "Wow." The headline belonged to the Houston Society page, the site Margaret refreshes the way some women water ferns. River Oaks elderly pillars stranded at airport as helpful relative bows out. The piece was 3 paragraphs of tone wrapped around a rumor. It described a holiday blizzard. The high that day would be 72 degrees and a heartbreaking lapse in basic decency. Anonymous sources, phrases that love a stage. I read it again and felt nothing theatrical. I opened a new email and addressed the editor. I kept it tidy. Subject correction request, River Oaks, hobby article. Dear editor, your post dated December 12th states that I left Margaret and Victor Whitmore stranded at Hobby Airport in storm conditions. Attached are a screenshot of a text thread in which I provided a car service recommendation and stated I was unavailable. The National Weather Service hourly report for HOU, high 72 degree of light wind, no storm advisory. A call log showing 5 missed calls between 1:35 and 2:10 p.m. with no voicemail left. Documentation of my role as trustee of the Brooks Family Trust. I request a correction. Thank you. Elaine Brooks. I attached the proofs and sent it. I printed a copy for my file and slid it behind the cover sheet of one packet. By late afternoon, the sky had gone the color of paper ash, the kind that clears a room without a draft. I washed my mug, set it upside down, and dialed the number on the inside cover of the binder. Gulf and Cypress Trust Company, this is Marina. Elaine Brooks, I said, trustee. I'm calling about Section 8C. I could hear keys settle in their trays and the soft industry of a small office. Of course, Miss Brooks. Do you need the language? I have it. I need the action. Understood. She took my name, the account, the last 4 digits. No one in River Oaks had bothered to remember. You may suspend distributions at your discretion for the reasons listed. Would you like to place a temporary freeze on scheduled transfers and debit activity? Yes. I'll note the record suspension initiated by trustee under 8C, pending review of misuse and coercion concerns. We will notify the beneficiaries per your communication preference or not at all. Do you want a confirmation letter by mail or email? Mail, I said. Paper makes its own manners. Anything else? One question, I said. Joint usage cards attached to household spending, those pause too. They do. Good. Marina's voice was even. We'll log the effective time as 4:17 p.m. Central. Thank you. Of course. I hung up and set the phone face down. The house remembered how to be quiet. The cedar in the closet breathed. I wrote the time on a sticky note and flagged Section 8C again, a second tab beside the first. Then I took a new sheet of paper and made a short list, not of what to do next, but of what existed. 12 packets, 1 binder, 1 email sent, 1 suspension in place. I didn't add anything aspirational. The page looked honest. At 5, Brooke called. I let it roll to voicemail. Daniel called 3 minutes later, his name bright on the screen like a glare you can't shade with your hand. I didn't answer. The phone buzzed a 3rd time from a number I didn't recognize, then gave up. I stood at the sink and watched the light fade out of the rosemary. A message arrived from the editor at Houston Society page, short. Received, reviewing. If you have WeatherDoc as PDF, please resend. We'll append if appropriate. I sent the PDF. I didn't refresh. I took the 12 packets to the bedroom and set them in my old leather case, the handle wrapped in a strip of worn canvas Caleb had stitched on when the original cracked. He liked things that kept working. Rosa's SUV pulled back into her driveway around 6. I could hear the thud of canned food against her pantry shelves through our shared fence. I imagined the line that would form on Saturday, families that didn't need a lecture, just a count that added up right. I rinsed a head of romaine, sliced the last tomato from a farmer's market stall that would close until spring, and ate standing up at the counter with the radio low. At 7:30, Daniel texted a single word, Mom. I put the phone in the drawer with the envelopes. The sound of traffic on the loop changed as people went from errands to tables, from fluorescent to lamplight. The mailbox held 1 circular and a white envelope from Gulf and Cypress. I hadn't expected so soon. Inside, a single sheet. Notice of trustee initiated suspension, effective. 4:17 p.m. It was a template, but the ink was wet. Someone in a downtown office had taken my call and moved their hand across paper with my name on it. I set the notice behind the cover sheet in the top packet and closed the case. The clasp clicked the way a hinge clicks when it's seated right. I turned off the kitchen light and watched the porch glow carry itself farther than it should, the way a small lamp does good work when no one asks it to be a chandelier. The binder stayed on the table tab, bright as a flag. The rain had finished. The house held. The notice from Gulf and Cypress dried on the counter, while the porch light held its small circle. I slid the letter into the top packet, closed the case, and let the house rest. When the days narrowed toward the year's end, Houston did what it always does, traded rain for humidity, and called it winter. The River Oaks Club glowed the way money learns to glow. Measured bulbs along the drive valleys, stepping from shadow, a brass trio under a canvas awning, lifting Auld Lang Syne in rehearsal. I parked 2 blocks down beneath a live oak that had outlived 3 construction booms and carried my old leather case by its worn canvas handle. The air tasted faintly like oranges someone had cut garnishes early, and the pavement kept yesterday's damp. Inside the foyer smelled of starch and lilies. A woman with a headset guarded a podium with a seating chart behind glass. She had the brisk kindness of someone paid to make friction look like formality. Last name she asked without looking up. Brooks, I said. She checked her list finger, moving smooth as a waltz. Brooks, 2 for Daniel and Brooke, table 3. And she paused. Elaine Brooks. It says TBD. That seems right, I said. She blinked, then offered a controlled smile. Bar is to your left. Silent auction down the hall. I thanked her and did not turn left or right. The ballroom doors stood open, white tablecloths, thin-stemmed glasses, centerpieces that matched the invitation. Volunteers placed name cards like chess pieces. Margaret Whitmore stood under a chandelier, navy silk and pearls, flanked by Victor and a committee circle. She saw me and lifted her chin the way a person does when remembering posture can stand in for proof. Brooke appeared from a cluster near the band, smile tightened by purpose. Elaine, she said, performing warmth for a radius of witnesses. You made it. I did, I said. Lovely, she said. We have donors flying in. Everyone's energized. She brushed an invisible crumb from my sleeve. The gesture you use on people you intend to edit. If you're staying for the seated portion, we'll find you a place. Something along the side, perhaps. Along the side, I repeated. She wanted me to accept the solution so she could call it grace. I set the case on a sideboard beneath a gilt mirror and clicked it open. The sound was quiet but exact. Paper loves a flat surface. Brooke's eyes caught the edges, binder clips, tabs, cover sheets. What is this? Clarity, I said. Servers passed with trays of champagne. Glasses ticked softly as guests lifted them from silver. Daniel approached, then tuxedo that didn't know him yet, tie slightly off-center the way it goes when a man dresses at speed. He looked at the case, at me, at the chandelier. Mom, he said. The word landed like a pebble, shallow in the throat. Hello, Daniel. He lowered his voice as if a whisper could move walls. Tonight isn't for this. It's for donors, I said, and for truth told near linen. I laid 12 packets on the sideboard in a grid. The cover page named what it named. The tabs shown: transfers, letters, childcare, repairs, communications, trust, suspension. Across the room, the MC tested a microphone. Feedback shaved the air, then eased. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. A club manager wheeled a cart of folded seating charts toward the door. A volunteer carried a silver bucket full of miniature programs. The band softened into the background like a carpet. Margaret reached us with the exact degree of smile required by her station. Elaine, she said, toneless. I didn't expect well. Welcome. I nodded. Good evening. Her gaze dropped to the packets. She didn't touch them. Is that necessary? Yes. She drew her pearls back into place, a reflex that wanted to become a sentence, and thought better of it. Please be seated, the MC said. Chairs scraped. Servers topped off water glasses, the small waterfalls of a well-run room. I took the case handle, lifted 6 packets in my left hand, 6 in my right, and walked the single aisle that wasn't meant for me. I set one at Victor's place, one before Margaret, one at Brooke's elbow. Guests looked at their bread plates, then at me, then at the paper. I did not rush. Daniel stood frozen at the end of the table like a man who can't find the exit in a theater he's visited all his life. At table 2, I set a packet before a woman whose foundation funds literacy clinics. She met my eyes and gave a tiny, neutral nod. At table 5, a man with a square jaw and a lapel pin that said, Board watched my hands and did not pretend not to. 12 envelopes found places among china that had never hosted the truth. When I had placed the last one, I returned to the sideboard and closed the case. The MC launched the script, welcome gratitude numbers that sounded generous in a room designed for sounding generous. Applause rose and fell on cue. Brooke at the far end breathed evenly, palms flat on the linen eyes, scanning for a leak she could stop with a glance. A man at table 3, gray hair, neat tie, a face that had earned quiet authority, lifted his packet a fraction and addressed no one and everyone. Ms. Brooks, he said. The room shifted a degree toward him. Under tab 1, the down payment, can you confirm the source and date? He didn't ask like a prosecutor, he asked like a bookkeeper. I recognized the cadence. Rollover account, I said. Wire dated August 14th, 2019, $24,000. Transfer confirmation attached. The lender's non-repayable gift letter sits behind it. He nodded once, turned the page. Someone near him exhaled the soft disbelief of a person who had assumed stories could outrun numbers. China clicked faintly as place knives were adjusted. Margaret lifted the cover and found tab 6 notice of trustee-initiated suspension and read quietly, lips thinning the way skin does when it's being asked to fit a new shape. The MC tried to resume auction lots a matching pledge, but the rhythm was wrong now. Victor cleared his throat and aimed for affable. "I'm sure there's a misunderstanding. These are private." I faced him. The Houston Society page called the weather a blizzard. A few people smiled without humor. The National Weather Service disagreed. Privacy didn't collapse tonight. Credibility did. Brooke stood chair legs, ticking the floor. "Elaine, you're turning a community evening into—" "A community evening," I said. "Community involves documents. Your guests are very good with them." The gray-haired man lifted a second tab. "Under childcare, these checks are they categorized as gifts?" "They were," I said, "for tax purposes. And because I didn't invoice my son for picking up his child when Brooke's consulting conflicted with nap time." A few heads tipped small, involuntary acknowledgments of sentences that landed true. Daniel's hands pressed flat against the tablecloth the way a man braces in a low surf. A club manager drifted closer, the polite gravity of someone hoping they won't need to be brave. I smiled at him and gave a tiny shake of my head. He shifted weight, then melted back into the wall. At table 1, a woman with a bangle stack leaned forward, bracelets chiming. "Is this about money or about being invited?" She asked the sort of question that likes its own sharpness. "It's about alignment," I said. "What people say at microphones and what they do when no one writes down the doing." She looked at the transfers tab as if it might answer a longer question. Margaret found breath again. "You could have called." "I did," I said. "You didn't answer." I nodded at tab 5 communications. The 72° F weather printout sat there with timestamps like neat stitches. Across the room, the brass trio surrendered their instruments to their stands and waited, hands folded. Servers stilled. Linen became landscape. Daniel spoke finally, voice low enough for the table, but not the room. "Mom, this is humiliating." For whom, I asked? The person who built a ledger, or the people who built a narrative? He flinched. Not the flinch of a man struck. The flinch of a man who had expected a cushion and found a chair. The gray-haired man, the one with questions that didn't sweat, closed his packet, squared it with the edge of his plate, and raised his eyes. For the record, he said professional almost to the point of politeness. The notice of suspension under 8C is routine when a trustee identifies misuse. If the trust document says what this tab says, the action stands. The word stands made a small sound as it landed like a foot placed firmly on a stair. A man down the table, the kind who believes volume can refund everything, leaned back in his chair and blew air through his lips. "This is tasteless," he announced to no one brave enough to disagree. "Then consider it unsalted," I said. I wasn't angry. The sentence had no temperature. It didn't need one. Brooke's eyes glossed not with tears, but with calculation. "We could have handled this privately." "You tried," I said, "publicly." The MC set the microphone down and took a step away from the podium, relief disguised as poise. Victor turned his water glass in a tight circle, creating a small storm he could control. Margaret placed the notice of suspension on top of her program like a new name card. At the far end of the room, the doors to the patio stood open. A current of Gulf air moved through the lilies. Beyond the threshold, the pool reflected the chandelier in a duplicate constellation. People who didn't know any of us took photos in front of the club crest and sipped drinks they'd forget the names of. Life kept doing its work, impolite to pause for anyone's plot. I took one step back from the sideboard. "Enjoy your evening," I said to the room at large. "Eat well, give generously." Tab 7 lists a dozen other places where money becomes food and light. That tab wasn't in these packets. It lived in my head, Rosa's pantry, the shelter, the clinic with fluorescent halls and stubborn warmth. A woman at table 2 raised her eyebrows, faintly surprised at the turn. Brooke caught that flicker, and for a second her shoulders passed through neutral. I lifted the case. The handle fit my hand the way it always had. Caleb's careful stitch under my finger's thread, burnished by years. Daniel looked like a boy who had wandered into a room he didn't trust and found his name attached to the furniture. "Mom," he said. I met his eyes, the color he got from me and the caution he got elsewhere. "Read," I said. "Then speak." I left the packets on the linen, the way one leaves place settings meant for use, not display. In the foyer, the woman with the headset glanced up, assessing disruption like a wind reading. "All right," she asked, professionally vague. "Everything's in order," I said. It was in the only way that mattered tonight. Outside, the air was warm enough to question the calendar. The valet stand buzzed with stories about tips and shoes, and a guest who always forgets her claim ticket. I walked the 2 blocks to my car beneath camphor and oak. Music threaded itself out through the hedges, a song that belongs to rooms that like the sound of themselves. A text arrived from an unknown number while I stood at the curb to let a couple cross. "We have friends on every board in this zip code. Be careful. No signature punctuation crisp." Margaret never signed threats and she never dragged them. They stood the way centerpieces do decorative until someone knocks the table. I put the phone away. On the live oak above a line of tiny white bulbs shook once in a breeze and steadied. The leather case leaned against my thigh, the weight familiar, not burdensome. I drove home with the windows cracked enough to let the lily's starch leave the car. Back on my street, Rosa's porch light burned low and steady. I carried the case inside, set it on the hall chair, and hung the yellow raincoat beside it. The house received the night without comment. I rinsed a glass and let the water run until it went truly cold. The cedar in the closet gave its small, clean note, and the rosemary outside leaned into a wind I couldn't feel. I turned off the kitchen light and sat for a moment at the table where the binder had sat all week. The wood warmed by my hands, the tabs quiet, the words intact. Morning pressed against the blinds with a flat, bright hand. The house remembered how to breathe overnight, slow, even nothing theatrical. I rinsed the glass I'd left in the sink and wiped a ring of water from the counter with the dish towel that smells faintly of lemon oil. The leather case sat on the hall chair, its canvas handle darkened where my fingers have always found it. The binder remained on the table tabs quiet. The phone charged mutely beside the outlet. 3 missed calls stacked themselves in Graybrook unknown Daniel. I let them be. I brewed coffee and took it to the back steps. The rosemary leaned forward after the humidity thick with green. Somewhere down the block, a delivery truck slid into gear and moved on. By mid-morning, the Houston Society page had appended a single sentence to last night's rumor: weather data disputed, clarification added by request, no apology, no byline, just an asterisk that made the original paragraph stare at its shoes. I printed the screen and slipped it behind communications in my packet, not as triumph, just order. At 11, Gulf and Cypress called. Ms. Brooks, this is Marina, notifying you that 2 scheduled household charges attempted to run this morning and were declined under the suspension. Logged and declined, I said. Yes, and a reminder, we've blocked joint use cards. You're within document authority. If you need written confirmation beyond yesterday's notice, we can produce it. I have what I need. Understood. Her voice had the calm of a person who stacks files, not feelings. We hung up with a thank you that didn't reach for more than it had earned. At the curb, the mailman set a rubber-banded clutch of envelopes into my box and raised 2 fingers without stopping. Circulars, a gas bill, a glossy catalog full of expensive lamps, pretending to be sunlight. Beneath them, a white envelope addressed to Daniel and Brooke at their River Oaks house, misdelivered to my street by a sorter who trusted a last name more than a map. I weighed it in my palm, bank logo windowed address the tone of ink that never means a party. I slid it back into my box and wrote misdirected return to carrier in a tidy hand. That was all. Rosa's SUV rolled by while I was still at the curb. She braked window down. I'm headed to the pantry to unload early. Need a co-pilot. 5 minutes, I said. Her passenger seat smelled like laundry soap and cumin. We drove the 4 minutes to the church hall with the kind of silence that isn't heavy, just 2 people going in the same direction. Inside the gym was cool and echoing folding tables already up a roll of brown paper stretched across one like butcher wrap. Rosa handed me a Sharpie. Totals. You've got the neat numbers. We stacked cans into pyramids, wrote 28 next to tomatoes, 19 beside peanut butter, 12 for baby formula. Volunteers drifted in: a retired teacher who had opinions about shelf order, a teenager in a soccer hoodie who apologized each time he bumped a table leg. When the doorbell rang for the first drop-off, it sounded like a bicycle bell. Small, cheerful, practical. Rosa nodded toward the list. Your handwriting falls exactly on the line, she said. I was married to a man who believed in plum, I said. Then he would like this, she said, tapping the column where every 9 sat under every 9. Between deliveries, we poured church coffee and leaned against the stage. A woman in a blazer I'd seen at the club last night walked in with a box of cereal and took in the room like someone remembering a different version of herself. She didn't see me at first. When she did, she straightened her shoulders, then set the cereal down and asked, Where do you need the most? Rosa pointed to rice. The woman carried the box over without comment. It wasn't absolution. It was rice. By mid-afternoon, we'd squared the totals and pulled the brown paper up with a satisfying rip. Rosa stuck the list on a clipboard and smiled without performance. You coming Saturday? I'll be here, I said. Truth didn't require symbols. Back home, the house had kept its place. I opened the windows for an hour to trade the air and set a drop cloth in the hallway. The bulbs in the ceiling fixtures had gone dim over years without asking permission. I climbed the short ladder and replaced them with warm LEDs that made the paint read as fairness instead of fatigue. On the 3rd fixture, one screw resisted. I braced my forearm against the ceiling and felt the muscle burn in a way that reminded me I still live inside this body. Caleb's photograph leaned on the mantel, not yet hung. The new frame suited him, walnut simple corners mitered clean. I set it upright and stepped back. His carpenter's grin carried both mischief and patience. He never warned. He observed. At 4:30, a courier rang. A small padded envelope rested on his clipboard, my own handwriting across the front, Daniel. I had addressed it after lunch, inside the spare key I'd kept to the house where my name didn't belong. The courier held out the digital pad, signature. I signed and watched him walk back to the van. He drove toward the loop toward River Oaks, where the street trees know the names of the people who hired the arborist. I closed the door and stood in the foyer until the sound of his engine faded. The phone buzzed. Daniel again. Then a pause. Then the vibrato of a voicemail landing without a ringtone he'd learned not to wait for an answer. I didn't press play. I folded a towel that had cooled on the dryer and set it on the shelf with the other's edges aligned. Near dusk, the editor at the Society page emailed a second time. Addendum posted. Photo credit removed. Comments disabled. The sentence carried no warmth. It didn't need to. I printed it and slid it behind the first printout, 2 thin pages that weighed less than a rumor. I fixed a small supper scrambled eggs, a heel of bread toasted hard, the last of a spring onion sliced into a green arc. The pan hissed and calmed. I ate standing up with the window open, listening to traffic shift from hurry to linger. Somewhere behind the fence, a neighbor's radio drifted across a baseball game, the small, companionable murmur that comes with innings you don't have to win to enjoy. At 7, a text from an unknown number. We are exploring our options with counsel. Polite, presentable, drafted to be forwarded. I set the phone on the counter and laid Gulf and Cypress's notice beside it. One document had a signature. One did not. The house did not take sides. It held the temperature I set. I replaced the curtain in the kitchen, a pale cotton that had been tired to the point of transparency, with a fresh panel. The rod creaked the way old rods do when asked to carry their share again. I wiped the sill, the screen, the edge where dust and paint always find each other. Rosa knocked just before 8, 2 easy knuckles. She held a small loaf of bread wrapped in a kitchen towel. Left over from the pantry prep, she said. We overbought. I haven't overbought anything in a while, I said. Then start with bread. She stepped inside and looked around as if the house itself had exhaled. New bulbs, warm ones. The old light was colder than it had to be. She nodded and set the loaf on the counter. I like this, she said, gesturing toward the living room where Caleb's picture finally had a home. He looks like he knows when to keep a joke to himself. He did, I said. She didn't ask about the club or the packets. She poured 2 cups of tea from the kettle I'd left ready and handed me one. We drank without filling the air. When she left, the hallway held the scent of toasted grain. Later, while washing the 2 cups, I noticed a hairline crack in the porcelain near the handle of the chipped white mug. It wasn't new. I ran a thumb along it and thought about stress and how it finds the thinnest part of any object. I set the mug back on the shelf anyway, front row, not demoted to the back. Night drew itself across the street porch lights, a dog's single announcement, the low rush of the loop. I walked the rooms with a notepad, not a list for later, just a brief accounting of what was true. The banister no longer wobbled. The hallway light held steady. The rosemary outside touched the window like a neighbor who knows when to go home. The leather case waited on the hall chair. I slid the 12 packets back into it and closed the clasp. Not because I needed to hide anything, but because paper rests better when it's contained. I turned off the lamps one by one until the house wore only the porch light and the stove's small clock. In the mirror by the door, the yellow raincoat hung like a memory that hadn't decided whether to stay or go. When I lay down, I didn't reach for the phone. Traffic thinned. The neighborhood found its level. Somewhere across town, a letter sat on a kitchen counter beneath a bank logo, waiting for the person who would open it. My roof held. The new bulbs made a warm oval on the ceiling. The cedar in the closet kept its quiet. I breathed in and let the light land where it wanted. Morning arrived clean and ordinary. I made coffee and sliced Rosa's bread, the crust clicking under the knife. The house kept its new light. On the porch, the air smelled faintly of damp soil and the rosemary hedge. When I opened the mailbox, a plain envelope waited without a stamp, my name written in my son's hand. I read it at the kitchen table. The words were uneven, not rehearsed. Daniel wrote that he'd watched the room tilt at the club the moment paper touched linen. He wrote that noise had been easier than looking at a ledger with his name on it. He didn't ask for money. He asked if I would meet him where the coffee refills come without asking. I left the binder shut and put on my yellow raincoat because the sky had folded into that gulf color that can't decide between sun and drizzle. The diner on Long Point was half full, counter seats taken by men with work boots and quiet appetites booths, holding mothers and lists. I chose a booth facing the door. The waitress came with a pad and a pencil dull from use. "Coffee," she said. "Please," I said. "And a slice of whatever pie is closest to ordinary." She smiled and brought apple. Daniel slipped inside a few minutes later, tie absent sleeves pushed to his forearms like he'd been trying to find the part of himself that lifts. He sat across from me and didn't look around to see who could see us. "Mom," he said. "Daniel," I said. He looked at his hands. "I'm sorry." The air above the coffee steamed and then settled. He said the word again without pushing it at me. He talked about the way a room can teach you who you've become, about the silence that follows numbers you can't unsee, about Brooke saying tradition out loud until it didn't mean anything. He didn't defend the story that ran on the screen. He didn't ask me to. The waitress filled our cups and moved on. Daniel wrapped his fingers around the mug like he used to hold a warm glass when the power flickered during storms. He took a breath that had work in it. "I can't carry what I tried to make you carry," he said. "I won't carry it," I said. He nodded. He didn't break. He didn't bargain. A truck rumbled past outside the window, showing only grill and chrome for a second, then clear again. I cut a corner of pie and ate it. Apple cinnamon, the taste of something that makes sense. "The trust stays suspended," I said. "That isn't a punishment. It's a fact." He looked at me, and this time his eyes didn't run ahead. "I know. I have time," I said, "and a small kitchen. That's what I have." He closed his hands around the coffee and held them still. We stayed that way a while, each of us letting a sentence be exactly the size it needed to be. He told me the Whitmores had opinions and offered them freely. He said he had returned a key to a door he couldn't open without losing himself. I didn't ask which door. He knew I'd already mailed the only key I had to his house. When the waitress brought the check, Daniel reached for it. I placed 2 bills on top of her pad before he could. He watched my hand and didn't argue. Outside, the sky had chosen drizzle. We stood under the diner awning while the day gathered itself. I don't know what to say beyond what I said he told me. "You don't have to," I said. He put a hand on my shoulder, not to claim or to steer, just to know exactly where I was. Then he dropped it and stepped back. The yellow of my raincoat reflected in the window. His face looked younger there, and then the reflection let him go. At home, the porch light had nothing to do at noon, but it kept its place. I put the kettle on for bergamot and set 2 mugs on the counter. Habit, not invitation. The leather case rested on the hall chair clasp, closed, weight familiar. I opened a drawer, took out Daniel's letter, folded it once with care, and set it beside the photograph of Caleb on the mantel. The frame caught the warm part of the day and held it. I stepped onto the porch with my cup. The rosemary brushed the rail in a light wind. Across the street, Rosa waved with the easy wrist of someone who doesn't need an answer to keep being kind. The air held the clean edge that comes when rain remembers to stop. Inside, the house wore its quiet without effort. The bulbs gave a modest gold to the hallway. The cedar in the closet offered its small, honest note. I left the front door open and set the screen in place. The hinge I'd oiled last week worked without announcing itself. The gate in the side yard stood just so open, the latch resting against the post. Nothing forced, nothing unsecured. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.